Knight International Journalism Fellow and former Wall Street Journal reporter Christopher Conte considers Uganda his second home. He lived there for 3 years, and soon after his arrival, he met a Kampala-based newspaper reporter, Lydia Namubiru. She shared with him interesting and insightful stories about her life. As time went on, their conversations became a running dialogue, so much so that the pair decided to collect stories from other Ugandan women and publish them. The collection ultimately became a book, Crossroads, Women Coming of Age in Today's Uganda. It's meant to shine a light on real women in the real Africa. In so doing, it's avoiding age-old stereotypes of helplessness and the need for Africa or its people to be rescued by the so-called developed world. Joining us now are Christopher and Lydia. Welcome to Full Frame.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Chris, take us back in time. This initial kind of conversation, what was it like, and what kind of caught your ear, and how did it kind of perhaps reshape the way you looked at Uganda?
Well, I think your introduction touched on it, actually. I think I went, I had been in Africa before, but I had never been in Uganda. But, you know, we have preconceptions and stereotypes even that we aren't aware of. And I actually remember I was based at the newspaper where Lydia worked. And the first time I had a serious conversation with her, we went to lunch in the company canteen. And I was literally blown away by this person who was so sophisticated and so fascinating. I suddenly realized that I was going to have a quality of conversation completely different than I thought I would have when I thought I was going to teach the unformed, poor Africans. I actually, and to this day, I still find that when I'm with Lydia, I listen a lot more than I talk.
Which is quite a quality when it comes to journalists, because they always have a lot to say. So what was your take on Christopher at first?
Well, I'm surprised that he says he was blown away. And I think if I'd known that at that time, I probably wouldn't have talked to him again. Because you're coming to a newsroom, a functioning, existing, room of 300, 400 professionals doing a job. Shouldn't be surprising that that there's a sophisticated, that they're sophisticated. Yeah. So, and that's, I didn't get that though at the time. I didn't realize he was surprised. So that's nice. So, because then we continued to have the conversation. I thought, but I did too have my own stereotypes. Because I think for me, Muzungus, as we call, white people, it's not derogatory. They are people of authority. Typically, you'll interact with them as your boss in a job, as the donor for a project you want to be funded. So it was very different to have a normal, ordinary conversation.
So when did the two of you realize that this needed to be out there? I mean, was it, did the light bulbs go on? Was that part of the initial conversations, or was it further down the road a piece?
Our first idea was to write a book called Conversations with a Mzungu. And it was just going to be a dialogue between the two of us.
And why is that important?
That's a good question. I think because there is a great deal of enlightenment that comes on both sides. Speaking as a Mzungu, I certainly learned and developed a much greater appreciation for the fact that that Lydia was part of a rich culture that deserved a great deal of respect, and that the way I, as a Westerner, wanted to relate to it, and the way I think Westerners in general should relate to it, is not as the pardon the expression, white knights who are coming in to rescue, but rather I think we need to approach each other, as you say, as equals.
Capturing all those voices and all those ways of looking at your country, it's fascinating. How did you recruit others to get involved?
In a way, that wasn't hard. I think we realized that a conversation between two people is not really rich, because at some point, you become monotonous. Even two people, you can only read so many essays from one person. But two, we became polarized. Like at one point, I was so defensive of everything that's African culture that when he wrote to me and asked, I just jumped at him. You're just trying to stereotype us, and this is not really, And at the same time, he too became sort of too defensive about Western culture, like out question things. And he's a liberal feminist person, much like me, but we found ourselves speaking for like the polar opposites of our cultures, just to be good ambassadors.
One of Lydia's pieces is just spot on about capacity building and all the catchphrases that we hear so much here in the West, and it's eye-opening reading that. But you say, and I want to get the quote just right, Christopher, that these essays tell stories about a rapidly changing society where they serve both as guardians of culture and harbingers of reform. So talk to us a little bit about this tension, if you will, that's going on. You've got these young women like this, feminists, and cultural stereotypes, and all of it's kind of this rich stew that's going on there in many respects.
Oh, absolutely. And, Lydia also talks about religion and being, surrounded by traditional religion, which is kind of shunned. That really is a legacy of the, the missionaries that to a certain extent, traditional African religion went underground.
Let me just ask a favor of both of you. Can you read just a short passage, if you will, from the book that jumps out at you? And then, Lydia, I'd like you read part of one of your passages as well. Chris, why don't we start with you?
Sure. The passage I'd like to read is written by a woman much like Lydia, named Shifa Mwesigye. And her essay actually talks about how girls and then young women are trained and prepared to be good wives. And, that includes everything to how to satisfy the man in the bedroom, to how to take care of his every need. And girls traditionally were taught that they were supposed to subordinate really their own needs and priorities to their husbands. Like the husband would get, fed first, taken care of, feet massaged, everything. And in some parts of Uganda, this is not uniform, but in some tribes, and several of the writers write about this, they were taught that girls and women should kneel for men. Mm. So if you knew Lydia, as you're getting to, you can imagine this is not a woman who's going to kneel for any man. But what interests me about the authors of this book is that they don't flatly reject what they taught, but rather they see ways that there's virtue in tradition, and they're in the essays and in their lives, they are trying to reconcile tradition with more modern
that tension
ideas.
We talked about, yeah.
So this essay actually refers to the lessons that this author learned, and she refers to Senga, which is the woman whose cultural role is to prepare the girl for a life of, being a good Ugandan wife. And so the author says, I do know this. Society still needs many of the values Sengas teach, like modesty and the virtue of putting others ahead of ourselves. We all would be better off if everyone believed that caring for others and upholding the peace, comfort, pleasure, and stability of family and society are more important than getting ahead individually. If I can just read a little more. She says, of course, these values are just part of the traditional contract. The other part is that men have their exalted positions because they have great responsibilities to provide for others, to keep the peace, and to uphold laws and moral values. Sadly, as women rebel against traditional culture, the male part of traditional values also is suffering. Men have concocted their own self-serving mix of old and new. They happily embrace emancipation when it serves them, wanting, for instance, to divide bills right down the middle or to partake of liberated women's commitment-free love. But they still expect their wives to kneel, cook, clean, and wait at home in warm beds with beads around their waists and terry cloths in hand. What's the solution? I'm still working on it.
You have one about spirituality. Will you share it with us?
I do. And I guess the background is, so before, we did, of course, like every civilization, have our own belief system, but then the colonial experiment stormed in, and with it, the imported beliefs of the Western world, and also, the Arab world, actually the Arab world before it. So my essay is just sort of talking about that, what that resulted into. So to start, Uganda is a potent mix of religiosity and spirituality. Nominally, 80% of Ugandans are Christian, and most of the rest have been instructed in Islam or some other imported belief system. We even have people whose religion is Judaism. Behind these foreign religions lie our traditional African beliefs and practices. There are no standards for balancing our imported faiths with our ancestral ones, but most people, whether they acknowledge it or not, straddle the fence. It is not unusual to find a father who attempts to secure his children a place in heaven by baptizing them Christian, but then who turns to the traditional spirits to secure his wealth by occasionally sacrificing a cock or goat in the presence of a spiritual medium.
Let me ask you the final question. Someone picking up this book, what do you want them to walk away with when they finish it?
I would like them to appreciate that we are not simple folks. We are not one thing and not the other. You can't, there's so many things people say about what Africans are or aren't, what Ugandans are or aren't. It's problematic. It's problematic to take a whole population and think you could capture it in a sentence, in a particular description. And the diversity in this, in the subjects and the feelings and the perceptions of the people in this book, I hope that the people may go away disagreeing with what we believe, but at least I hope they can go away knowing we are complex.
Very. Chris, Lydia, thanks so much. The book is called Crossroads. Great read. Pick it up. It's available.